you traveled to Chicago or even DeKalb or somewhere, it was hard to find at-home amateur theater. And there's a lot of people out there that in their younger years love theater and love doing, whatever in the theater. And there just wasn't anything here like that.
It was driven by those people in the bigger companies that were here. Delmonte and Cairns were the big ones, and there were people in those organizations who were used to theater and who really wanted to have those kinds of activities.
I believe Dottie Barron, Carol Bushing, Carol Weedman, and a couple of other people just felt it was time for Rochelle to have a performing arts group.
Well, I think there were just a few people who started to talk to each other about the theater. The two that I remember the most was Dottie Barron and Dan Handler, and they were basically the pushers.
I started with VCCT in late '83, early '84. I saw an ad in the newspaper that they were looking for they were auditioning for a show. So I finally had time and I went.
I think 1980. My first show was Come Blow Your Horn, which was like show number 3 or so, yeah. And I've always been in theater, musical theater, because I was always worked as a musician. So, and that's what I came from out east. So
I saw a notice in the Rochelle paper for auditions for a show called Death and Life of Sneaky Fitch. That was in 1984. I believe it was their 5th or 6th show. They had done a couple before then, and I had never done anything in theater, and I thought I might like it.
I had a young daughter, and we saw that they were doing this show, Harry, Larry, McBarry, and the Sinister Zangle Mangle, by this new community theater group, and we decided to go. And if you know my daughter, Susan, she was born to be in theater, and we went to see it and just said, oh boy, this is something we'd like to do. And that's how it started. By the next year, 82, I was a member, and by 83, Susan was in her first play.
When I came, I think I missed the first meeting or two, but I was invited to come to an early meeting. Being new to the community, I had gone to the print shop to get membership cards printed up for the Illinois Theater Association, of which I was the vice president at that time. Dan Handler said, "What is this ITA?" And I told him, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm the new drama teacher." He said, "Would you like to come to a meeting about a community theater?" I said, "Sure." So went to Barb Bashashi's house. And there were probably 10, 12 people sitting there. Dottie Barron was running the meeting, and they were talking about buying the Hub Theater and making a community theater out of it. And I was, I guess, bold enough to say, "Don't you think you should have a group to support you before you go and buy this space?" And they said, "Well, think about it." I said, "Good." But that was also the night that they named the community theater as Vince Carney Community Theater.
None, absolutely none.
Only in school. I came from Polo, very small high school. We did 1, maybe 2 shows. Yeah, I was more on the musical end than the theater, but we did a play every year.
High school. And I was involved in through sorority. We did skits and stuff with that way. I was involved in that kind of thing.
I got my master's in theater arts at Western Illinois University, and from there I moved down to the lab school on campus and in the College of Education, and I was teaching all levels of children from preschool up through seniors. And I helped a little bit with, there was a group that were doing plays over at the other high school, and I helped over there as well. And then I moved to ISU, and kind of the same job. I worked in the lab school, but they had a community theater all put together, so I worked with them. Did a play called Godspell, which was one of my favorite things, and so I was involved there. And from there, I moved here. So, I was doing 3 to 6 shows a year with different groups, and I was very passionate about it.
I know he was a patron of the arts, and they were very, he and Mary were very well traveled. They were all over the world. If you ever went to their house, it was like a museum because they had so many artifacts and things from all over the world. It was so interesting to go over there and to see their house, and he was very interested there again in music and in theater and in the arts.
Sorry. Vince was a guy around town who supported the arts. He gave out scholarships, or he helped give out scholarships. He promoted the arts. He was just an all-around really nice guy. And the theater group decided to honor him and his commitment toward the arts and to education and literature, and chose his name.
Mr. and Mrs. Carney were very prominent people in town. He owned a business downtown, but they traveled all the time. They traveled all over the world, collected a lot of art from all over the world, and they loved theater. So when it came down to what do we name this group, somebody said, well, there's always Vince Carney. He's the biggest theater lover in town. And we did. And the family was very supportive of us at the beginning, and so that's how it came to be.
Vince and Mary Carney were patrons of the arts. They belonged to the Chicago Art Museum. They were members there, and they were involved with like the Rotary, bringing speakers and entertainment here to town. And so, as an honor to them, because they were longstanding citizens, I think it came from them. I think the most fun thing was the fact that they actually had the Von Trapp family here, and they came here in the late 40s, early 50s. And Maria got sick here and ended up spending several nights at the Carneys. And then they got her on to the next stop. The rest of the family continued on their journey, and the Carneys took Maria on to meet up with them.
I have no idea.
I was not there at the very, very beginning when they set their goals, other than to keep art, entertainment, that kind of live theater in front of a small town community, so that you didn't have to go to Chicago at the exorbitant prices, because most folks couldn't do that.
The girls that founded it put together a mission statement, but it was mostly just to give an opportunity to anybody that wanted to get on stage or even work backstage, like I did a lot, to be involved in a community theater of friends and people of all ages and all backgrounds, and we were all wannabes at some point in our life, and here was a chance to be.
Before we had a theater, before we did anything, we put bylaws together. And the goal statement is exactly the same today as it was then, and I think it's very good. It says, Vince Carney Community Theater shall be a nonprofit corporation, the purpose of which shall be to promote civic interest in drama and to provide a vehicle for recreation, education, and self-expression for its members. I don't think you can make it any better. Every show has its own little problems, but right at the beginning, we had no money. And somehow Dottie had talked to a professor at the College of DuPage, and he had a script, he had costumes, he had props, and he offered them all to us free to use. And that got us into our very first production, which was Harry and Larry McBarry and the Sinister Zangle Mangle.
Membership. When I joined, there was a much bigger, there's probably 40, 50 members that were actively involved. And although I do remember there was hard to get people that were to be serving in board positions, because I had just finished the first show and I was nominated to become secretary and on the board. So I was a member of less than a year, and now I was on the board, and it was kind of startling to me that you'd move up that quickly. But it was more of, who'll do it?
Finding a performance space was always a problem. Finding rehearsal space was always a problem. We used to do set construction at the old St. Patrick's Annex, which was south of Central School, but that building was eventually torn down, and once that was torn down, then building sets was difficult. Finding a place to paint sets was difficult. It was a never-ending struggle to just find places to perform.
The biggest difficulty is location. Location, location, location. Every time we wanted to do a show, we had to find a place to do it, because chances are the last place we had a show wasn't available. So to plan 2 or 3 shows a year without knowing for sure whether that last venue was even still going to be in business was always a problem until we got established at Hickory Grove.
Every show is a success.
Well, the success of different shows when they were well attended, that was great fun. I think probably the most fun was when the Kearney girls came back and watched us do Thanks to Mr. Vince. And they were here and they participated one night in one of the shows, because it was an ad-lib kind of a loosely done show that we had written ourselves. And so the girls were here and they were brought up and talked to and asked questions and so forth, and they were kind of included in the show. And that was the most fun for me.
As a group, I think being together for 40 years is a success. Lots of theater groups come and go. We've been very fortunate. We're an ongoing theater group, probably one of the longest surviving, continuously performing groups in Northern Illinois. When you're running with all volunteers without a home, it's really difficult to hold a group together. I also think we've brought entertainment to Rochelle that they're not normally going to see.
But every show has its own kind of celebration and success. And I can truly say that most of the time we had such a good time putting these shows together and doing them, learning about other people and just doing something different.
Personally, it's filled my heart. This is my #1 love, other than my family and my life. If they always say, "What's your hobby?" and my hobby is this community theater, because this is what I love doing.
We've had people quit the week before opening the show. We've had performances canceled because of storms. We've just nothing that's been a major surprise, nothing unexpected.
One of the other neat things that we did is we did a premiere for Al Reynolds, who was the high school art drama teacher at the time, or literature, and he asked if we would do a show of his, so we were the premiere, and we did it at the Egyptian, and that was great fun to have the professional, with dressing rooms and the theater and everything else that was there that would go with the Egyptian. And so in bringing our set back, we put it on a big trailer and had to haul it all back to Rochelle, and we went the back roads and left half of it. It fell off of the trailer partway here between Creston and Malta. And the next troop came by and said, "What is all that debris in the road? I wonder who dropped all that." And it was us, and it was our stuff that was laying in the middle of the road.
In the summertime, originally, we performed at Cooper Park in the band shell. And on my second show, which that I did out there, which was The Sound of Music, a small tornado went through and took out some of our sets, put one of our actors in the hospital overnight, and we weren't sure we were going to get to finish that show, but we did. And then the next one I did out there, big show, that was South Pacific, it would rain right up until curtain time, almost every show. So people didn't really come to sit out in the park if it was raining. But then it would stop just in time for the show to start. So we still had a good run.
And I can say that all those things, because none of them were, going to be catastrophic, that somehow it all got done, and that your success was, or if something happened, the show must go on, and it worked. Well, as I said, we did Harry, Larry, McBurry, and the Sinister Zangle Mangle, and I got to direct it. So I was the first director. We did it at Central School.
I accidentally became a director. My niece was scheduled to direct a play out at the park. It was The Wizard of Oz. It was going to be our first big musical. My niece was a theater major and all the way through college, so she was anxious to do it. And a couple months before the show was to start rehearsals, her husband got transferred and she wasn't going to be in town. So it was, okay, we're going to do this big show, we're all ready, who's going to direct? And nobody raised their hand except me. So I gently raised my hand and said, well, I think I could do it. And so that was my first directing job, was The Wizard of Oz at Cooper Park. There was no tornado, there was no rainstorm on that one. It went off beautifully. We had sponsors and help from everybody in the community because it was the first big musical show we had ever done.
In the beginning, we didn't have to do anything. It just seemed to be a continuing stream of people wanting to do stuff.
Ad in the paper, on the radio, and word of mouth. There wasn't the electronic at that time, and we would, if you had a friend, I remember recruiting several folks that I worked with through the school district in, was it Love Letters, I think. One of the gals that I worked with, it was the only show that she ever did, but she didn't have to memorize, she could read it. And so Eileen was involved in a show then, and it was fun to do that way, that you get people involved through acquaintance.
Lots of times it was word of mouth in the early days. You know someone who you thought could put a nail into a 2x4, and you draft them into building sets. Jackie, Emily, Julia, all at one time were part of set construction crews or painting crews. You didn't have to have a lot of talent. You just had the ability. You had to have the ability to show up.
We've always placed things in the newspaper, on signs around town that auditions are coming. Right now we have a monthly newsletter, and that goes out to the members. And we have another thing that goes out to like 600 or 700 people, letting them know that we're there. And I think a big part of it is mouth to mouth, hand to hand, because you have friends and neighbors, and you like to do props, and you take your husband's hand and you said, you can do some carpeting, carpenter work, and you can get this done. And because it's a nice feeling to be around these people, everybody's smiling and you're learning new things, and they would come back and maybe skip a show and miss it and come back after that.
Well, we always put ads on the radio and in the newspaper, but mostly it's begging. You ask your family, your friends, you put the word out by anybody and everybody that you can think of, and you cross your fingers that they show up at auditions. And for the most part, we've been pretty lucky. It's always a surprise when somebody shows up that we never met before or that we had no idea was even interested. Well, the very first show was done on the gymnasium floor at Central School. At every school, any school that had a stage or a gymnasium where we could set people, or a church, was a possibility.
We did them at the old Klondike. We did them all over the place. We did shows at the VFW. We did shows at the Moose Club. I mean, it was all fun. One time we had to, when we did the Crucible, and we did it in the old high school gym, and it just happened to be that it was like 105. You know, one of those summer weekends where it's unbearable, and of course there's no air conditioning, and it was just kind of fitting that the show was the Crucible.
We took on the road before we performed in Rochelle. We performed at Byron in their high school. And I remember that we were still painting the inside of the doors, so they had to make sure that you touched only the doorknob as you walked through because it was still wet paint when the show opened. And that was one weekend in Byron, and then we brought it back here, set up the entire set all over again, and went to work and performed here.
This is to perform. We've performed in gyms, the high school theater. We've taken the show on the road to the Egyptian in DeKalb a long time ago, Byron Theater. We've performed at a place used to be the Creston Supper Club, which is now the, I believe it's now the antique store in Creston. We performed at a place called Three Kings, which is now the Catholic Education Center on Cairn Road. So it's been just a never-ending battle to find a place to perform, a place to build sets, a place to audition. I remember days of going into people's garages and building sets in the garage and then hauling them to the play site when we were ready.
Annie, because my daughter was in it, and it was a musical, so I could, do the music, and we did some synthesizing and sequencing with Sherry Wells, and I was able to conduct, and I was in the show, and so that was just, that was exciting for me, and especially having my daughter in the show, so that was great.
Your good man, Charlie Brown. I loved that music. It was one that I had suggested, and when it was done then, I enjoyed it. I wasn't particularly involved in it because I'm not musically inclined, but I absolutely loved it. I was involved in selling tickets or taking, on the house or stuff, but the music just, I loved it.
I don't have one favorite. I have several, and I'm listing them all, damn it. I love the Tuna series. Performing with Terry Camplain, those three shows were just awesome to be a part of. They were funny, they were well written, they were a hoot to do. I loved the two Escanabas that we did. I was only in two of the three, so the two I loved were the ones I was in. But my favorites probably were the classics, Arsenic and Old Lace and Harvey. Arsenic and Old Lace was, I believe, the second show I was in. And I was Dr. Einstein in that. And I just had a great time. It was a wonderful show and got to meet all sorts of neat people. And Arsenic and Harvey was the first show I did with Terry Camplain. And that was probably in the mid-90s. And it was just a really great show. I love watching Jimmy Stewart in that. And I just love that whole show, the philosophy of it and everything behind it.
Arsenic and Old Lace. It was, I think, maybe around the third season, and Carol Bushing and Carol Weedman played the two aunts, Abby and Martha, and we clicked like crazy.
That is so hard because I have loved the one, especially the ones I've directed. You put your whole heart into it, and when you see it come to fruition on the stage, and there's nothing more you can do. I always say my most awful time is opening night because there's nothing left for me to do. I just stand back and watch everybody do the things I've asked them to do. So The Wizard of Oz, of course, was my first, and I loved it. And then 10 years later, I got to do it, or was it 20 years later, I got to do it again. So I've done that one twice. Altogether, I've directed over 12 shows, and every one of them has been my favorite, I guess.
The two funniest I have were during one of the tuna shows. With tuna, we have dressers behind stage. And a character like Terry would step off on one side, I would step off on the other side, and the dressers would pull down our pants and they'd pull off our shirts and they'd tell us to stand there, keep your hands at your side or put your hands up in the air. And Sally Sawicki was in one of my dressers one night and she's back there during rehearsals and she's tugging away. And I turned to her and I said, Sally, that's not a handle. And then the other most embarrassing moment was we did a takeoff on Survivor called Don't Vote Me Off. It was a write your own show. And I was the naked guy in that. And every night I rolled my pants up and parade around with stuff to give the impact, to give the idea I was naked. Well, one night I thought, I need a little more reality. So I went to Walmart and I bought some thongs for men. And I was backstage and I had it on, and Beth Hahn was backstage and she looked and all I heard was, "Oh my God, Dicko, what's wrong with you?"
I think some of the things that the Terrys have done, standing backstage and watching, knowing that you are dressing them from one female to another to a male, and I can still see Terry Camplain standing behind a half door dressed as a policeman on the top half, but the bottom half is in pantyhose, and I'm looking at him from the back behind the stage.
I was directing I Do, and one of our different locations was the upstairs banquet hall at Hickory Grove. And we had the sound system all set up, and it was one of the new times that we used microphones. And all of a sudden we realized that the drive-through orders from McDonald's across the street was coming through our sound system and going out into the audience. So our sound man had to do some fast reorganizing so that we weren't ordering hamburgers and fries in the middle of a wedding ceremony.
We did Play On, and somebody skipped from one act to the second act, and we were in a loop. So I don't remember who rescued us, but it did get rescued. But we had to go back and pick up all that information from Act 1 so that we could continue. But yes, somebody made one loop because it's so similar. It's a repeat, and we just jumped to Act 2 in the middle of Act 1.
Again, during the tuna shows, I got up about 11 pages early in the script and went off stage and changed into my next and got changed into my next character. And leaving Terry out there with basically nothing to say because we just skipped 11 pages of dialogue. And when I came back on, I did my shtick as that character went back, and they changed me back in, and I went in, sat down, and we just picked up the dialogue right where we left it off. Renee Page was sitting out in the audience. She was directing it. And she said, "There's something different tonight, but I'm not sure what it is." She didn't even notice it, but we didn't lose our composure. Terry kept on with the trooper, just kind of talking about whatever he was talking about while I was backstage getting dressed, and then I came back on, and it was, if you didn't know the script, you would not have known we did anything wrong. But we both rolled with it pretty well.
One about Sneaky Fitch, we did it outside again, but I think it was a 3-act play, but it had different scenes. And all of a sudden we were into Act 2, and the actors started doing Act 3, or a scene from Act 3. But we were in Act 2. So we had to have a really fast backstage conference with Carol, the director, who said, "Okay, we're going to keep doing this scene up to this point, and then we'll just do it again next act." And it came off, and most of the audience didn't even know what had happened. But
I'd love to see the future. Another 40 years of this, that you can have theater locally with local participants. And I don't know how we're going to get more people to know about it, but it's like how we can be here for 40 years and have as many people around say, "There is? I didn't know there was a theater group." And yet, how do you if we could just do and get more people involved and still be here 40 years from now, would be wonderful.
Continuing to do quality shows that entertain families, maybe expanding into the Hispanic market a little bit, getting some shows in that are well-known, well-attended, and good shows. I'm obviously at the age where I can't do a lot of the roles that are out there, but I also hope they throw in some things with older people in them so that I can still perform on stage.
My biggest hope is that all those lottery tickets I keep buying will pay off because Vince Carney Theater is the first place that gets the money. But I want the theater to continue. I want people to continue to support us. And I would like to see more young people, children's shows, so that we can get the kids started when they're in grade school, like my daughter did, and that it will keep going until their children are able to take part in this theater, hopefully in this building.